And Princess of Wales have rolled up their sleeves to give back to UK communities following King Charles's coronation. Joined by their children, it marked an important milestone for Prince Louis.
The royal palace tried to keep it quiet, but the moment the words slipped out, the illusion shattered. Behind the glittering balconies, the polished ceremonies, and the carefully choreographed smiles of the monarchy, something deeply unsettling had begun unfolding, and it involved the youngest and most mischievous face the public thought they understood, Prince Louis. From Prince Louis's balcony antics to August Brooksbank's royal debut, we're taking a look at the highlights of the weekend. But what the world saw as charming royal moments was hiding a storm building quietly behind palace doors. The same little prince who once stole every spotlight with his cheeky smiles and playful waves had suddenly become the center of a deeply troubling situation the palace could no longer keep hidden. For years, Prince Louis had been known as the royal family's spark of chaos and joy, the child whose boundless energy turned formal ceremonies into viral moments, whose laughter echoed across palace balconies and warmed the hearts of millions watching around the world. But then something changed, and the palace knew it. What began as whispers inside the royal residence slowly grew into something impossible to ignore. According to a rare and unusually personal statement that emerged from Buckingham Palace, the youngest son of Prince William and Princess Catherine had been experiencing an emotional crisis serious enough to shake the household itself. The message was careful, painfully careful. Every sentence seemed measured, restrained, almost cautious, as if the palace was walking a tightrope between revealing too much and not revealing enough. Yet beneath the polite language and diplomatic tone, there was something unmistakable: urgency. This was not a routine royal update. It was not a scheduling change or a ceremonial adjustment. Something far more personal had forced the palace to speak. For a family that has spent centuries mastering the art of silence, this moment was extraordinary. The royal institution is famous for its secrecy, its controlled messaging, and its strict protection of children within the family. Personal struggles are rarely acknowledged publicly. Vulnerability is almost never allowed to surface. But this time, that wall cracked. And when it did, the world noticed. The announcement made one thing painfully clear: the well-being of Prince Louis had suddenly become the most important priority inside the palace walls. Titles, traditions, royal engagements, and centuries of protocol had all taken a step back. The focus was no longer on appearances or reputation. It was on the emotional state of a young boy who, until recently, had seemed like the happiest royal child in public view. The revelation struck the public with unexpected force. Royal watchers, commentators, and journalists immediately realized how unusual this disclosure was. Statements from the palace are typically filtered through layers of advisors and communications teams. They are polished until they reveal almost nothing. But this one felt different. There was weight in every word. Outside Buckingham Palace, reporters began gathering within minutes of the statement appearing. Cameras lined the gates, microphones were raised. Everyone sensed that something significant had just been revealed, even though the palace had deliberately avoided dramatic language. The absence of details only intensified the concern, because silence from the monarchy usually means protection. But public silence combined with a rare admission of distress, that meant something serious had already happened behind closed doors. And the public reaction was immediate. For years, Prince Louis had become a beloved symbol of youthful joy within the royal family. Viewers had watched him cover his ears during loud celebrations, pull playful faces at official events, and wave enthusiastically from balconies as crowds cheered below. His personality had become one of the most relatable aspects of modern royal life. So when the palace suggested that the same lively child was now facing emotional struggles severe enough to require privacy and protection, the contrast felt almost shocking. The cheerful images the public remembered suddenly collided with a far more complicated reality. Social media, which often erupts with speculation whenever the royal family is mentioned, reacted in a surprisingly different tone. Instead of gossip and accusations, many voices expressed genuine concern. Questions replaced rumors. Empathy replaced criticism. Even royal commentators who usually analyze every gesture and sentence from the monarchy seemed hesitant to push further. Something about the situation felt deeply personal, a reminder that behind the crowns and palaces, there were still human beings dealing with the same fragile emotions every family faces. But the real shock came moments later, because the next voice to address the situation was not a palace spokesperson. It was Prince William himself, and that changed everything. Instead of standing behind a podium surrounded by advisors or reading from a carefully scripted statement, William stepped forward in a way that immediately signaled the gravity of the moment. Cameras captured him speaking with unusual openness, his words carrying none of the usual formality expected from a future king. What the world saw was not a royal announcement. It was a father speaking about his child. William explained that Prince Louis had been experiencing ongoing emotional distress, something that had quietly been developing for months inside the royal household. But subtle changes had begun appearing in the young prince's behavior. Nights had grown restless, illness. Sleep had become irregular. Moments of laughter were suddenly followed by unexplained sadness. At first, the shifts were easy to overlook. Life inside the royal family is constantly filled with travel, public appearances, and changes in routine. Children adjust, families adapt. But slowly, the small signs began forming a pattern that could no longer be dismissed. Mood swings, long silences, moments of confusion that seemed too heavy for a child so young. William admitted that he initially underestimated the seriousness of what his son was experiencing. Like many parents juggling responsibilities, he had been focused on official duties, royal engagements, and the relentless demands that come with his position. But then something happened that made him realize the depth of Louis's fears. One quiet moment, one question. A question so simple and so heartbreaking that it changed everything. And when Prince William revealed what his son had asked him, the entire country fell silent. Because suddenly, the story was no longer about a royal child. It was about a frightened little boy trying to understand a world that had begun to feel uncertain. And that was when the palace realized this situation could no longer remain hidden. The moment that question left Prince Louis's lips, the carefully controlled world of royal composure quietly shattered inside Prince William's mind. It wasn't a dramatic scene. There were no cameras, no reporters, no palace officials standing nearby. Just a quiet moment between a father and his son inside one of the many rooms of their historic home. And yet, that single question carried the weight of something far deeper than anyone in the palace had realized. In his small voice, filled with uncertainty and a kind of fragile innocence that only children possess, Louis asked something that froze Prince William in place. He asked whether his mother might disappear too. The words were simple, but the fear behind them was enormous. Because for a child growing up in a family whose life is constantly watched, discussed, and analyzed by millions, the world can feel far less stable than it appears from the outside. Adults see royal tradition, ceremony, and power. Children feel something very different: tension, whispers, and the invisible pressure of a life they never chose. And somewhere along the way, Prince Louis had begun to feel that pressure. William later explained that the question revealed a quiet storm that had been forming inside his son for months. Louis had begun sensing the emotional currents around him, the shifts in routines, the tension that sometimes lingers around public life, and the constant presence of cameras and attention. For adults, those things are manageable. For a child, they can feel overwhelming. The once lively prince who used to burst into laughter during balcony appearances had started retreating into silence. Mornings that once began with excitement slowly turned into quiet routines. Breakfast tables where Louis once chatted energetically now sat half empty. Meals were pushed aside. Favorite foods were ignored as if they no longer mattered. The palace gardens, once filled with the sounds of his games and playful adventures, had grown strangely still. Toys sat untouched. The playful energy that once raced through the hallways had faded into long stretches of quiet observation. But the most worrying part wasn't misbehavior or rebellion. It was the absence of it. Louis wasn't throwing tantrums. He wasn't shouting or acting out. Instead, he had begun withdrawing inward, sitting quietly for long periods, watching the world around him as if he were trying to understand emotions he couldn't yet put into words. To William and Catherine, that silence was far more unsettling than noise, because silence can hide fears that children don't yet know how to explain. The couple began noticing subtle changes everywhere. Moments when Louis seemed distant during family conversations, long pauses when someone asked him a question, nights where sleep simply refused to come. Sometimes he would lie awake, staring into the dark, his mind filled with worries too complicated for a child his age, and those worries were growing. Children often absorb more than adults realize. They notice whispers. They feel tension in a room. They hear fragments of conversations that adults assume they don't understand. Inside a family as visible as the royal household, even small disruptions can echo loudly in a child's world. Prince William admitted that it took time for him to recognize the full weight of what was happening. Royal duties rarely slow down. The schedule continues. Appearances must be made. Responsibilities demand attention. But when Louis asked that heartbreaking question about his mother, everything suddenly became clear. The little prince wasn't simply going through a passing phase. He was afraid. Afraid of change. Afraid of loss. Afraid that the world around him, the one that once felt safe and predictable, might suddenly disappear. And for a child who had grown up surrounded by history, expectations, and the enormous spotlight of the monarchy, that fear felt very real. That was the moment Prince William made a decision that surprised many observers. He chose family over royal protocol. Instead of hiding behind palace tradition or allowing the situation to remain buried behind formal statements, he stepped forward publicly publicly and spoke about his son with a level of honesty rarely seen from members of the royal family, not as a prince, but as a father. He asked for understanding, he asked for patience, and most importantly, he asked for space. Space for his youngest child to feel safe without the constant glare of public attention. It was an extraordinary request coming from a family whose lives are almost permanently on display. But in that moment, William made it clear that the well-being of Prince Louis mattered more than any tradition. Inside the palace, efforts began quietly shifting toward helping the young prince rediscover his sense of security. Experts were consulted, private family time increased, public appearances involving Louis became far more carefully managed. The goal wasn't to shield him from the world forever, it was to give him the time and calm environment needed to understand his feelings and regain confidence. Because beneath the royal titles, beneath the centuries of tradition, there is still a simple truth that sometimes gets forgotten. Children are fragile. They don't care about crowns or history books. They care about feeling safe, understood, and loved. And for Prince Louis, that journey back to emotional comfort had now become the most important mission inside the royal household. As palace gates remained closed and official engagements quietly adjusted, the world began realizing something powerful. Even the most famous family on earth cannot escape the realities of childhood fears. Behind the elaborate ceremonies, the golden balconies, and the polished royal image, there is still a young boy learning how to navigate emotions he doesn't fully understand. Prince William's message reminded the public that strength doesn't always look like standing tall in front of cameras. Sometimes strength means stepping away from them, choosing protection over performance, choosing patience over public appearances, choosing love over legacy. And in that quiet decision, the royal family revealed something more human than any ceremony could ever show. Because in the end, this story was never about palace drama or royal headlines. It was about a father recognizing his son's fear and deciding that no tradition, no protocol, and no crown would ever come before helping that child feel safe again. And as the world watches from a respectful distance, hoping the young prince finds peace again, one truth echoes quietly beyond the palace walls. Even in the grandest castles, childhood still needs protection.